All right. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a lot in store for you today. Really looking forward to how the next hour and a half unfolds. Technically 2.5 hours if you're one of the newer grantees and you're sticking around for the new grantee orientation. But I want to start off by saying Happy New Year to all of you. And as I mentioned in the email invitation for this session, we have a little tradition here at the U.S. Department of Education whereby when one fiscal year ends and a new one begins, we wish one another Happy New Year, and it's sort of a way for us to, say goodbye to the previous fiscal year and really sort of welcome, the work that lies ahead for us. And so, I just wanted to take a moment to wish you all a Happy New Year and to really kind of bring you all into that tradition, here at the U.S. Department of Education. And so, my name is Orman Ferez. I oversee the American History and Civics and C programs here at the U.S. Department of Education. Really excited to be with you today. As I mentioned before, we have a lot in store. I do want to make you all aware that this webinar is being recorded. We'd like to ask you all to please mute yourselves during this presentation. And it feels like every meeting or session, there's always at least one person who's having a meeting in the background and don't realize that they're actually off mute. So we'll just ask you to check, make sure that you're on mute, make sure that you stay on mute throughout the presentation. During this presentation, you'll actually have the ability to use the chat feature to ask questions or to leave any comments. So please do feel free to use that feature. We'll be monitoring throughout, and we'll make sure that we get answers to you. And so, of course, again, if you're just joining us, we ask that you, if you haven't already, to enter your name, the name of your organization, and then, of course, tell us what project year your grant is currently in, and then something that you're excited about or something that you're really looking forward to with respect to your grant this year. All right, next slide, please. And so here's our agenda for today. We're going to start off with welcome and introductions in a moment. We'll do a really brief year in review. And then we're going to spend some time talking about some of the key topics that arose over the course of FY24 as our team was interacting with each of you. We're going to take a quick look at what's going to be happening in FY25, and then we're going to have something really fun where we have two outstanding grantees from the AHC portfolio who are going to talk a little bit about some of the collaboration that they've engaged in over the past year. And then we should have some time for Q&A. Then we'll pause for a moment, and then we will transition into the new grantee orientation. So let's go ahead and kick it off with introductions. I already introduced myself, but what I want you to do is to have an opportunity to hear from and see the members of the American History and Civics program team. It's a fantastic team that is filled with dedicated professionals that are here to really support you and make sure that you guys have everything that you need to be successful. So we're gonna start off on the left with Dr. Joshua Batchelor, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about who he is and what he does at the U.S. Department of Education.
Thank you, Armand. My name is Joshua Batchelor. I am a program officer here at the Department of Education. Less about me, but more about you. I just want to say thank you for the work that you do on the field every day, getting into and expanding the experience of American history and civics. So thank you all. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Donna DeFino.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donna DeFino. I've been with the department since May of 2022. I work on the American History grants, and I also have the privilege of working on our two non-grant programs, Teach to Lead and the School Ambassador Fellowship. And I will turn it over to Michelle.
Hello, all. My name is Michelle Kennedy, and I am Program Officer here with the Effective Educator Development Division. I work on the AHC grants, both on the academies and the national activities side. I also oversee some congressionally funded community projects grants and do a lot of data. So if you ask me about numbers, I will probably talk your ear. But I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to be your program officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikki Palmore. I've been working with the department since March 2022. I started working with the AHC NA grant starting in around January 2024 of this year. I've enjoyed myself learning about the wonderful things that you guys are doing in support of history, civics. And now I'm going to just turn it back over to Armand.
Thank you, Nikki. And so while we're at it, can we go back to the last slide? Can we just get a little bit of love for this amazing American History and Civics team? I know that each of you have had opportunities to really engage with them and sort of work with them and learn from them. But I want you to know that we also learn from you all. And so these interactions that we have are mutually beneficial, where we feel like we're able to provide you all with supports and services and technical assistance that's beneficial to helping you to achieve success, but also just the conversations and the information that we're learning from you is helping us to really make adjustments and moderations in the work that we do to better support you in the future. So we thank you for that. And so with that being said, let's go to the next slide. We also want to celebrate you. And we want to welcome you all, to the conversation as well. And so, what you see on your screen here is a list of the American History and Civics grantees, Georgia Center for Civic Education, KEDC, and then of course Wilderness Education Project, which is our FY24 grantee that was recently funded. And so just want to welcome all of you. Absolutely welcome Wilderness Education Project. You're not new to American History and Civics, but you are new to the American History and Civics Academy space with this new grant. So want to welcome you all. So please show these grantees some love. Great. And then let's go to the next slide. So I'm not going to name all these grantees. This is of course, our American History and Civics National Activities portfolio of grantees. But I did just want to say again, welcome. When we talk about Happy New Year, and we talk about really sort of saying goodbye to to the previous year, we're really speaking to a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of dedication and commitment that each of you is really putting into into this work, and there's a lot of passion that's evident in the work that you do. So I realize that that font is a little bit smaller. There's a lot of you that are out there, but I just want you all to show yourselves some love, and in particular I wanted to recognize the new grantees that are a part of this work as well. San Jose State University Research Foundation, Board of Trustees of St. Petersburg College, and KQED Incorporated. These are all organizations that were just awarded funds in the most recent fiscal year. So they are starting their grants this month. So we'll obviously be working with them closely to provide support. So again, much love to the American History and Civics National Activities grantees. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So our objectives for today, we want to accomplish a couple of things here. First, we want to just showcase a little bit of the work that kind of goes into a little bit behind the curtain, with respect to administering these grant programs. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that we do that we want to make sure that you guys are aware of, so you can understand the way that we are supporting you. And then of course we want to talk about some of those trending topics that I mentioned earlier, and provide answers to some of the key questions that pop up when we are interacting with you during monitoring calls at the summit, and just sort of ad hoc communications that we have as well. And then of course we want to sort of leverage that into clarifying some of the misconceptions, and then finally learn best practices from grantees that have really been engaging in some exciting collaboration work over the past year or so. Let's go next slide. All right. So the first thing I just wanted to really, really briefly do is kind of give you all a little bit of a perspective on what a grant year looks like for the folks that introduced themselves to you earlier. We have been supporting nearly 40 American History and Civics grants across the academies and national activities portfolios. And what that means is, 40 APRs, IPRs, nearly 40 DBSs, um, over 100 monitoring calls, were conducted in the past year. And for those of you that have been involved in preparing for a monitoring call on your end, you can only imagine what it's like to prepare for monitoring calls for an entire portfolio on a quarterly basis. And then, of course, we added new grantees, which I mentioned already. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time doing is processing grantee requests, and we introduced some new processes. And so everything that I just mentioned there doesn't even include all the additional, conversations and meetings and video calls that happen in between monitoring and in between um, uh, monitoring calls and summits and in between IPRs and in between DBSs. So just wanted to kind of give you all a sense of what that workload looks like for this team and how they are truly committed to supporting you throughout the course of a fiscal year. Next slide. And so then here's a couple of the various TA offerings and activities that occurred over the FY24 year. And so you all have participated in multiple EED-led webinars, office hours for the IPR, for the APR, for the DBS, and for various other processes. We've had topical webinars that were led by AEM, our TA content provider as well. And so obviously, we've seen a lot of you that participated in those sessions, and we're continuing to try to figure out like what are the most valuable, topics that you all want us to focus on. And then of course, we have 2024 annual EED Grantee Summit. I had a chance to meet a lot of you and have really good, rich conversations with you all to learn more about your products or projects. And we expect to have another summit, probably in the DC area, probably sometime in June or July of next year. It's to be determined at this point when the date will be, but we expect it'll be around the same time frame as last year. And then finally, we also, launched some new tools really intended to help, make things a little more efficient and streamlined across our processes. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And so those tools that I mentioned, two in particular that we launched were the EED Grantee Request Portal and Smartsheet, right? And so everyone, all of you have access, the FY22 and FY23 grantees have access to the EED Grant Request Portal. And really the idea behind that was to really try to streamline the processing of grantee requests. And previously, requests came in a multitude of different forms via email, via just, conversations in passing, sometimes in an APR or a DBS. They came in a lot of different formats, and it was just, difficult for the department to keep track of all the different ways that we were receiving those. So we kind of launched this tool to try to really streamline those processes. And so that tool launched in February of 2024. We have thus far across the EED division received 227 grantee requests, and most of those requests have been for budget modifications and or project changes. So just to give you a sense of like what we're seeing most often. The other tool that I wanted to highlight here is the Smartsheet, which was launched in March of 2024. And so Smartsheet is really a tool that we launched to really facilitate the creation of logic models and project plans. And so those of you that have had grants with us for some time realize that logic modeling is something that is very, very important to the Effective Educator Development Division. We feel that it is a game changer in terms of helping an organization really organize around its work. And so the project plans that are also contained in Smartsheet are really a sort of a complement, to that work in terms of how they break down the individual tasks that make up tasks, I should say, and subtasks that make up that work. So as I mentioned, that was launched in March of 2024. It's available to all active FY23 grantees and beyond. So FY24 grantees that are on the call, you all will be meeting with our contract partner AEM to begin building out those logic models shortly, and those will live in Smartsheet. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Yep, there you go. Thank you. So what I want to do is take maybe the next, 25 minutes or so, 30 minutes or so, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time really talking through some of the topics that have really been elevated from conversations that you've been having with Michelle and Donna and Joshua and Nikki. And so these are, what you see on your screen are 7 questions. We framed them as questions, okay? And we have answers to those questions. And so we're going to spend the next little bit of time kind of really talking through these topics. And what I'd love for you all to do is, as you're listening to what I'm going to be sharing over the next, half hour or so, would love for you all to share thoughts in the chat. If you have questions, if you have insights, or if you hear something that you're like, okay, well that's an aha moment for me, or that's something that I wasn't aware of. Would love to hear that, because we want to follow up with you and make sure that we're able to to sort of close any loops on anything that may have been a previous misconception, or anything that you may have misunderstood previously. Or anything that perhaps we misspoke on, previously. So that's sort of the purpose for this next piece is that once we're done over the next 30 minutes or so, that you will walk away feeling that you have clarity on each of these issues. And so I'll just quickly walk through what these questions are. And so the first one is what happens with anticipated unexpended funds. And I know that's something that you all have probably worked with each of your program officers, is really some level of conversation about there being, maybe some funds that are sort of left over without a true purpose for how they're going to be used, and a conversation about what considerations need to happen there. Second question is, what factors contribute to the department's decision to reduce a grant budget? Sort of goes hand in hand with that first item of anticipated unexpended funds, and we want to make sure that you understand, like, what are we thinking? What are the things that we are sort of considering when we're making a recommendation to reduce a budget? And then the third item is, when is approval required for project or budget changes? And as I showed you in that previous slide, you probably saw that there was a high number of budget modification requests and project changes, right? And so those tend to be quite frequent, because there's often times when grantees need to make pivots. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. And then what constitutes a change in project scope, which kind of goes hand in hand with the previous one, because if you've ever had a conversation with Nikki or Joshua or Donna or Michelle about changing your project, probably the first thing that they asked you or they suggested was, we want to make sure that, you're not changing the scope of your project, right? And so the next item that we have is, what are the expectations for how you all will be using Smartsheet? I just kind of previewed that tool. It's a new tool, so we want to make sure that we kind of level set on what the expectations are, not just for you all, but also that how we'll be using it. And then the final two are, how can we improve performance data submissions? And then finally, what should you all be considering as you're beginning to prepare for a no-cost extension? All right, so we are going to dive into the first question. But before we do, I want to just really, sort of reinforce this message. And I know you guys have seen this a lot, because I think we started really kind of pushing it out there in our messaging and in our emails and in our slide decks, and pretty much at every training or webinar or office hour session we do, because we want you guys to understand that funding equals activities, right? And so there's a couple of points that I want to make on that. And the first one is that when we award funds to a grantee, the expectation truly is that it is for the grantee to carry out the specific project activities as designed in their original application, and that those activities are implemented within the specific time frame that's outlined in that application. So, I'm not gonna spoil what I mean by that, but we're gonna get into that in a little bit. But just keep in mind that the expectation is that grantees are carrying out the project as designed within its time frame, as designed and outlined in the original grant application. The second thing that I want to make sure that you all are aware of is that you know, when we award funds, or when you're spending funds, it directly affects the outcomes for educators and students within participating districts, but also in non-participating districts. And so every time we make an award, there is every time we make an award to an applicant, there's an applicant that didn't get funds, right? And so we have to be really, really responsible about, making sure that projects have the amount of funds that they need, but not more, right? And so if you ever feel like your program officer is going down a line of questioning that seems like they're going after funds, the reason for it is because we are always sensitive to the fact that when we give funds to a grantee, as a grant, there is some grantee that didn't get funds. So if you overestimated in your budget, no fault of your own, it's our responsibility to make sure that whatever those actual funds are that are needed for the project, that's what the budget actually becomes, and that the remaining funds come back to the department. And so I wanted to say that explicitly, so that was very clear for everybody. And then the final piece here is that funding spent and unspent also directly affects the amount of funding that's approved for subsequent project years. And so as you are, spending funds and realizing after you work, particularly for the FY24 grantees and even the FY23 grantees that started last year, as you're spending down your project funds, you may start to realize that perhaps, we didn't need as many funds as much as we thought we would need, or perhaps we are not able to, get the kind of reach for recruiting participants for our projects or what have you. And that stuff happens, actually, believe it or not. And if that's the case, that's okay. What we're asking you to do is to communicate with us. We will adjust your budget. We can adjust your budget in the subsequent year also to make sure that we're right sizing the budget. But the important thing is that we have those kinds of conversations with you so that we understand sort of where your capacity is with your project at all time. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. And a couple of really quick definitions here that I just want to kind of go over. You'll hear me use some terms that may not be common terms that you all use. So just so you know where we're coming from, you will hear me use the term anticipated unexpended funds. I think I've already used it a few times already. And anticipated unexpended funds are basically just the funds that a grantee expects will be remaining at the end of the project year after all planned project activities for that given performance year have been completed. Okay. And so basically it's just, after you've done everything that you need to do, this is the money that you think is going to be left over. Carryover activities are approved activities that weren't completed during the previous project year. Okay. A term that we use often is rollover funds. And so rollover funds do not equal carryover funds, first of all. Rollover funds are the portion of your G6 balance that reflects unused funds from the previous project year. Okay. So if, at the, after September 30th, you still have $100,000 in G6, those funds don't disappear. They stay in G6. Okay. And they just roll over to the next year. Carryover, on the other hand, is the portion of your rollover funds that are associated with one or more specific planned unfinished project activities that have been approved by your program officer to be completed, right? So carryover funds are a subset of rollover funds. So just because the funds exist in G6 doesn't mean that they've all been approved for use to complete project activities. And as I already said, unexpended funds do not equal carryover funds. There is an approval process that has to happen for those remaining funds to be able to be used as carryover. All right, so I just wanted to go through those definitions, and now we will jump into our questions. And so the first one that I posed earlier was, what happens to anticipated unexpended funds. And so the first thing that I just wanted to flag here is that anticipated unexpended funds can result from a lot of different things, but primarily it's going to be some kind of a cost savings that's due to, one of many factors or a range of different factors. And so it could be that, as I mentioned before, the grantee overestimated its budget. It could also be that the grantee missed project targets, right? We talked a little bit about recruitment. We were going to recruit 100 teachers for our trip to the Smithsonian. We were only able to recruit 75, right? And when that happens, there are per participant costs associated with each one of those target teachers. So when you don't meet that target, then that means that there are dollars that are left on the table that probably are not needed by the project. Obviously, we'd want to have a conversation with you about it before we make a decision, but generally that's the case. From our perspective, is that those are funds that are usually no longer needed by the project if they did not meet that target. It could be something as simple as vacant project positions, right? Like our project started in October 1. We didn't actually hire all of our staff until April. And so for all of those months of vacant positions, there's dollars associated with those. And so those are generally the types of areas that the program team will have conversations with you about, before making any recommendations to reduce funds. And as I mentioned before, as I just mentioned, the program team is really going to try to collaborate with you to the extent that they can to identify an accurate amount of anticipated unexpended funds. And it's really, really important for us because the one thing that we don't want to do is cut grantees off at the knees. We don't want to pull funds indiscriminately and then put you in a situation where you don't have the funds to actually execute on the project activities that you design in your project. So we're always trying to work collaboratively with you to make sure that you have what you need, but really no more. Okay. And then you'll see like that third item there. It just kind of highlights the way that we will sort of process a reduction, right? It's beneficial to the Department of Education because we can reinvest the funds if instead of just deobligating extra funds, we pull it away from your continuation award, right? So if a grantee has $200,000 that we've identified as funds that they're not going to use, rather than us just taking it out of G6, we'll take that $200,000 from the new money that you would receive for the next project year. You'll still have that $200,000 in G6 to use. We're just taking it from the new money that you would have gotten. So you'll just get less new money, basically, is what is the way that we handle that. And then, as I mentioned before, the program team is really kind of committed to ensuring that you guys have everything that you need to be successful. And the last thing that I wanted to just highlight in this slide is, again, funds equal activities. So again, we're always trying to pinpoint the accurate amount of funds that you need to execute in your project. And then, of course, finally, unexpended funds do not equal carryover funds. And so those are just a couple of reminders that I wanted to include here on the slide. Let's go to the next one. All right, so this is a fun one. Maybe it's not that fun, but what factors contribute to budget reductions, right? And so there's a few things that we are always considering in the back of our minds when we are pondering whether or not we need to make a budget reduction or whether we need to have a conversation with you about whether we need to reduce your budget. And so, and those things fall in basically three buckets, right? Grant implementation history, how on track have you been? What's your track record in completing planned project activities? Is it likely that you're going to be able to complete the remaining project activities in the time frame that you've allotted? Have there been a lot of delays, or have you had to pivot, many times for your project? And so again, we're always trying to make sure that your project stays as close as possible to its original design. So if you keep pivoting away from what the original design was, then obviously that's an area of concern for us that might necessitate a budget reduction. And then finally, does your project plan need to be updated? The second big bucket that we consider is your fiscal management history, right? Is your grant making drawdowns on schedule, right? And we recognize that every grantee's schedule is going to be a little bit different. Some grantees pull down funds on a monthly basis, some grantees on a quarterly basis, some grantees communicate to us that, you know what, we don't really make any major expenditures until the summer or until late spring. So, with that being the case, don't expect us to make any drawdowns. And that's actually really valuable information for us to have. But whatever your schedule is, we want to know that you're actually pulling down the funds because, again, funds equal activities. So, and activities equals funds. So when we see that there's no money being drawn down immediately, from G6, a red flag goes up for us that maybe this grantee is actually not implementing project activities. And then, does the grantee have a large available balance, right? Are we getting to that late summer timeframe, June, July of the project year, only a couple of months left in the fiscal year, and the grantee is still holding on to 70, 80, 90% of their funds? Big red flag for us when we start to see that happening. Did unexpended funding roll over in a previous year? And if so, how much, right? And then the last big consideration is the quality of the budget plan and the budget narrative. And this is something that is really, really a challenge for us because, when we get an IPR or a DVS or a budget, revision, they come in very different shapes and forms. Sometimes they are very, very detailed. Sometimes they are not. And when they are not very detailed, it is very difficult for the program team to ascertain exactly how you're spending those funds and what the justification for that expenditure is. And so I implore you today, your program team will implore you, particularly as you all are working on your DVSs and updating budgets and working on IPRs, later in the fiscal year, to provide as much detail as you can so that we understand exactly what it is you're trying to do with the funds and have your justification for how you're planning to spend those funds, why they're important, why they're necessary for the project. All right, so let's go on to the next one. All right. And so the next one is, when is approval required for budget, project or budget changes? And so we wanted to add this one because there's a lot of, guidance out there from the Department of Education. Surprise, surprise. There's a lot of, language out there in, regulatory spaces, statutory spaces, et cetera, that can give organizations with discretionary grants a lot of ideas about what is possible and what is not with respect to changing and modifying their project. And so I will start from the top. Grantees are expected to implement their project as designed. We kind of talked about that already in the original application, and complete everything within, the grant's performance period. So, any action to change the list of activities, the impact of your activities, the timeline of your activities needs to be approved by one of the 4 program officers that you saw introduce themselves earlier. And essentially your program officer that's assigned to your grant. And it's just very, very important. And so, we won't approve, first of all, any change that alters the scope of your project. And I'm going to talk in a moment, about what constitutes a change in the scope of the project. But what I want to recognize or have you recognize is just, whatever the size is, of that plan change or modification, you must discuss it with your program officer, right? And that's important. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of guidance out there. I think I've heard from grantees that there's a 10% threshold, which our team is aware of. There's a 10%, or there's some language that says there's a 10% threshold for grantees to make changes without seeking prior approval. There's also language out there that I can share that says that grantees, or that the program officers are required to make, have conversations or discussions with grantees on every change that they want to make to their project, right? And so I will just say that the guidance that we have consistently gotten from our Office of the General Counsel, our program attorneys, is that we have to make sure that every single, change or modification that you want to make to your project is discussed and does receive approval. And the reason for that, in part, is because it helps us to protect you from situations where you make a change to your project, or you make a change to your budget that is not allowable, or it's not allocable, or it's not considered reasonable or necessary. And when those things happen, grantees end up having to return funds. And so it's always uncomfortable when grantees have to return funds. I don't like to tell grantees they have to return funds, but I will do it in part because it's my job to. If a grantee it finds himself in that situation. So I again, open, transparent communication with your program officer is going to be the key to success and the key to you avoiding the discomfort of having to return funds or modify a project in a way that that you did not intend to. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So we just talked a little bit about what constitutes a change in project scope. And so there's a few things that I wanted to highlight here. And these are sort of the three buckets that generally we see. Adding a new activity, I think that one is pretty obvious. You guys have probably heard all of your program officers sort of speak to, adding activities, new activities versus previously planned activities. And so, an example of that might be adding some new professional development activity that wasn't previously planned, right? Maybe there's some additional funds left over, some anticipated unexpended funds, and we're trying to figure out how can we use these funds. That would be considered a change in project scope. And then, of course, shifting funds from one area to cover costs to add a new, like a data system, or to expand an evaluation, external evaluation, or something like that. Any kind of project activity that wasn't included in the original project design would fall into that category. Another example would be, perhaps increasing the amount of an activity or increasing its scale, right? So, we had planned to do 2 cohorts for our residency, but, we think we can squeeze in a third, right? And we also believe that we'll have the project funds for it. We want to add an additional professional development session. We were going to do 4 per year, but now, given the budget and the cost actuals, we think we could do 5 actually, right? Or perhaps, we originally wanted to recruit 100 teachers, but the demand was so high that we want to do 125, right? So each of those things is a change in the scope. It's a change in the agreement. If you really look at your application, and we look at your application like a contract, right? And so if you look at that agreement, then it's sort of exceeding or almost like breaching that original agreement. And so, again, we have to keep your project as close as possible. Are all those things awesome things that I just mentioned? Absolutely. More cohorts is great. More professional development is great. More educators benefiting from your project is great. But for our purposes, we have to make sure that you stay exactly where your project is. And then the final thing is just altering the target population for your project services, right? And so altering the district, replacing school districts with, that might have different demographics, that would be a change in scope. Adding, participating school districts, we were going to work with 4 districts, but we increased that to 6. Those are all things that would constitute a change in the project scope that we would need to have conversations with you about. All right, next one, please. All right, so really quickly, I'm just going to talk about Smart Sheets, and I won't go through this entire slide, but really quickly, for those of you that aren't familiar with Smart Sheet, it is an interactive tool that I mentioned before for managing logic models and project plans. FY23 grantees have access to it. The FY24 grantees will also have access to it by early next year. And how it's going to be used is basically in preparation for calls and for communication. And so your program officers will be reaching out to you and asking you to make regular updates, at least before you have a monitoring call, so that they can use it for preparation purposes. And so that's sort of what the expectation is around it. It's a really, really dynamic tool. If you only use it to make updates and to sort of keep track of it from that standpoint, it's still exceptionally useful for you. But if you really dig into the tool, I think it's something that can be really beneficial and help you guys keep on track. Some of you have your own systems internally that you use and that you've probably been using for some time for project management and performance management. But in this particular case, like, we think this is a really dynamic tool. And one of the great things about it is that it can be used as a communication vehicle between you and your program officers. So when you're making updates and you have a question about something, you can ping Nikki or Joshua or Donna or Michelle, and they will have the opportunity to respond to you and communicate with you directly in the tool. So that's sort of what the expectation is. The other expectation is just quickly, whenever we do approve a project change, is to make sure that there's alignment between whatever that project change was in your tool and your project plan. So those are kind of the two responsibilities there. We would love for you to use it on a daily basis, but at a minimum, we just need you to make sure that it's updated, at least on a quarterly basis when in preparation for monitoring calls. All right, next slide, please. All right, and so how can we improve performance data submissions? And so this is one that comes up a bit. I know we've gotten a lot of questions this year about GEPRA measures and and use of GEPRA and how to provide GEPRA data. And so what I have on the left side is a couple of frequent sort of limitations that we find in the data. So some things that sort of stand in the way of us having the best quality data that we could ask for from grantees. And a couple of things that we find are, for one, we find that in some cases there's no performance targets. So a grantee just didn't provide us with any performance targets. And when we don't have performance targets, it's very difficult for us to understand the progress that you're making against your own goals, right? And so that's important for us to have. And then, of course, we find often that there's no performance actuals. So maybe we'll have targets, but then we don't get the actuals, in the DVS, the data verification sheet, that really tell the story of, how you did in, comparison to, to your targets. And then finally, the last two, we find often that there's percentages that are provided without context. And then sometimes we find that the DVS targets match the DVS actuals, but they don't match the IPR targets, right? And so the IPR target is sort of the target of record. The IPR target, the target that goes in your interim performance report, is you telling us mid-year, this is what we expect to achieve, for this year. So you shouldn't edit your targets at the end of the year to meet what the actuals were that you actually received. And that happens sometimes, believe it or not. And I'm going to skip over the middle part, just in the interest of time, and go all the way to the right. And so on the right side, these are sort of what the expectations are. These are the things that we need you all to do for us to make sure that we have high quality data. And so the first is obviously ensure that your IPRs include performance targets for the current project year. And I say current project year because, as I mentioned before, sometimes those targets are over the life of the grant. So on an American History and Civics Academies grant, it's very difficult for us to derive any meaning out of targets that are 5-year targets, right? The same target for year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but really it's just saying that at the end of the project, this is what we hope to accomplish. We need to be able to see data on an annual basis to understand what your goal is for the year and what you achieved for the year. The second item is, don't change your targets to correspond with lower than expected actuals. If your target was 100 and you achieved 30, then you got 30 out of 100, right? Don't make the target 30 to coincide with the actual of 30, because we do need to see that progress. And it allows us to really target technical assistance, particularly if we see across a portfolio that grantees are struggling to meet targets in areas. We can always galvanize, support, technical assistance from either our contractor or from within the portfolio from grantees that maybe are not struggling. So it's really helpful for us to have that insight. And then, of course, we want to make sure that percentages have a numerator and a denominator. So, just a percentage is great. We appreciate that, but it doesn't really tell us a story other than just, what the rate is. So we do need to see the numerator and the denominator so we have that context. And then finally, always, and this is true for every slide that you'll hear me speak through today, is just make sure that you're communicating with the PO. And that's the most important thing. In this case, when data are unavailable or may be delayed, it's just really important to make sure that you're always having open and transparent and regular communication with your program officer. All right. And then my last one that I wanted to talk through today is, I know some of you are considering no cost extensions. I've had a couple of conversations with folks about grantees that have been asking about no cost extensions. And so what are the things that you should be considering as you're preparing for a no-cost extension? And so the first thing that I just wanted to raise is the first thing you need to do is just really understand what a no-cost extension is for and what it's not for. And so a no-cost extension gives extra time to a grantee to complete project activities that were delayed due to some form of extenuating circumstances, right? So a no-cost extension is not an additional project year. I remember when I first came on board at the U.S. Department of Education, I think there was most of the grants were 5 years then, but there was an expectation that a no-cost extension was year 6, right? And so a no-cost extension is not year 6. It's just additional time for a grantee who, for some, special, unusual reason, was not able to finish their project within the project timeline. And as I mentioned before, really, really critical that you complete your projects sort of as designed and within the original timeline, within that original period of performance. So NC is not an additional project year. Second consideration, plan to finish on time, as I just mentioned. Plan for all project activities to conclude by the end of the grant's period of performance. You shouldn't be planning for a no-cost extension before the last year of the grant, right? Even for those of you that are thinking about a no-cost extension now, it's probably a little early right now, unless you just absolutely know for sure we had this really crazy thing happen that derailed our project, and we just need a few extra months in order to finish it. Right. But otherwise, you still have time to really be thinking about how can I tailor my remaining project activities in such a way that they'll allow me to finish. Is a no-cost extension actually necessary? And we get lots of situations where the grantee really just needs to spend down money, right? Like all of our final project activities, our final PDs happened in the summer, and we need to pay out stipends, right? Grantee doesn't need a no-cost extension for that. Or our contractor, our evaluation contractor is finishing up their work. They'll be finished by December. A grantee doesn't need a no-cost extension for that because an evaluation can be completed during the liquidation period, right? The 120-day liquidation period after the grant ends. So really important to make sure that you understand exactly what it is that you need the no-cost extension for and whether you actually need a no-cost extension for that. And then the last few here, what's the scope of the no-cost extension request, right? Like what activities are you seeking additional time to complete, and how much time and funds are going to be needed? How feasible is it that you'll complete the work? If you've got a really big scope of work to be completed in a no-cost extension year, first question I'm going to ask Nikki or Donna or Joshua or Michelle is, why didn't this work get completed, in the the grant's regular period of performance, right? That's the first question. And then the second question I'm asking is, and they can attest to, I ask them all the time, like, what's your gut feeling? Like, what is your your gut feeling, and is it feasible that this grantee is going to be able to, given their track record, finish this work, during the no-cost extension period? And that's even before I'll elevate it, elevate the request. And then, what's your rationale for the no-cost extension, right? NCs aren't automatic. And so were there special circumstances that occurred to delay the completion of the project? As I mentioned before, there has to be some kind of, special circumstances or something extenuating that led to the project being delayed or stalled. And then finally, the quality of your performance data. And this is really critically important. Have you been submitting timely performance reports? Have your reports included, accurate information? If we don't have data from you, it's really, really difficult for us to, to approve a no-cost extension. So as I mentioned before, these are just some of the things that, sort of, raised or arose, in conversations that we had with grantees throughout the year. We wanted to make sure that we put them on screen, have a conversation about it, give you all an opportunity to ask questions. But I hope this information is really helpful for you as you guys embark on your FY25 grant project activities. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Nikki Palmore, who is going to talk a little bit about what you all can expect in FY25.
Thank you, Armand. Next slide. Okay, 4 monitoring calls and 1 new grantee post-award meeting will take place in FY25, which are, of course, all aligned to the grant cycle. Next slide. All grantees should submit an annual performance report in 2 phases. The interim performance report, IPR, details progress made during the first 6 months, and the data verification sheet, known as DVS, describes progress made during the remaining 6 months. The complete APR provides progress made toward accomplishing program goals and use of funds over the performance period. Prior to reports being submitted, webinars will be scheduled to provide instructions and next steps. The webinar for the FY24 DVS will take place on October 31st. The forms and guidance for the FY24 DVS were sent out on Tuesday of this week. If you didn't receive this communication, please let us know. Next slide. Okay, so there are 4 critical decision points throughout the year. Currently, program officers, including myself, are reviewing rollover funds to determine the amount of funds needed to complete remaining year 1 activities versus excess funds. End of year substantial progress decisions will take place in mid-February, followed by continuation award carryover and no cost extension decisions in July. Next slide. Okay, so for FY25, EED will offer 5 technical assistance events. There will be 2 new grantee orientations facilitated by our EED Technical Assistance Center. The October 29th meeting will focus on technical assistance offerings, and a deep dive into logic models and project plans will take place during the 2nd orientation meeting. 2 Teach to Lead summits will take place, one in the spring and the other in the fall. These summits bring grantees, educators, and stakeholders together to solve problems and engage in strategic planning about issues in education. The in-person EED annual summit meeting will take place in June or July. Next slide. So early in the presentation, Armand shared with you information about project change requests. There are specific times in the year when grantees should submit formal requests. Amendments, budget modifications, changes to key personnel, and other types of requests can be submitted anytime during the project year. Carryover requests should be submitted after post-IPR monitoring discussions, and no cost extension requests should be submitted after post-DVS monitoring discussions during the final project year. And Armand just shared some of that information with you. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Donna, who will introduce the grantees that will showcase their projects.
Thanks, Nikki. So I have the incredible privilege of introducing a few grantees who have been with us since 2022 and before. And so we just wanted to take an opportunity to highlight some collaboration between grantees and to just kind of showcase some of the potential benefits of collaboration. And so it's my honor to introduce KEDC, Kentucky Educational Development Corporation, and also Ball State University, Dr. David Ruth from Ball State, and then Dr. Jim Evans and Wendy King from KEDC. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you all.
Thank you so much, Donna. I will go ahead and get us kicked off. I know that we are on a time schedule. So I have a couple of just quick questions that I want you to think about. When you think about connected communities and you think about social synergy and partnerships. So I want you to think about the last time that you bought a new gadget or a new appliance for your home. What did you do? Did you just take an impulse buy, go on to Amazon and just purchase it? Or did you look at reviews? Chances are you probably looked at some reviews. You looked at other people, like what they commented on Amazon or maybe on Best Buy. The next question I have for you is think about maybe a road trip that you've been on, maybe a new restaurant that you wanted to try. Did you do the same? Did you look at reviews? People who had been there prior to, what people said about that new restaurant or maybe a new place that you've never traveled to. Again, did you look to reviews? Chances are all of us have done that, correct? We've all looked at what other people have said about a new product, a new place that we've been to eat, a new place that we've stayed. Why is that? Next slide, Donna. That is the power and the impact of social media. This is pretty alarming and wonderful statistics all in the same, but there are 49 billion users worldwide who engage in social media, one for connection and for engagement. But marketers tell us that 73% feel that social media is a positive marketing tool. And I would agree with that because I know I go to social media to buy things, to look for things, that kind of wonderful thing. But here's the statistic that is really awesome. If you look, 97%, yes, that's not a typo, 97% of buyers find that user-generated content is more credible than anything that, say, Johnson & Johnson puts out on their own websites. Why is that? Well, it's because research tells us that word of mouth is one of the most effective forms of marketing. It's driven by sources like our friends, our family, our peers, and it's because we trust them. So, over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about how we can use that same word of mouth, power of social media to influence and to, I guess, draw that social media power of connection in our programs, because one thing we know, it works. So I'd like to introduce my friend and my colleague, David Roof.
Hi. So thank you, Wendy. That was great. And I will just kind of get started by telling you how we were introduced both to Jim Evans and Wendy King in Kentucky. Is that when we first started our project, my project is working with a local district to develop a scalable model for civic education. And our district is a high need district, all Title I schools. And particularly our elementary schools, a number of them are 70-80% free and reduced lunch. And when we first started our project, I think we ran into some struggles, especially with the earlier grades. How do we get teachers involved? And it wasn't that teachers didn't want to be involved with our project, but they are under tremendous pressure to raise literacy scores, other academic scores. And what we needed to do was really convince them that civics and history doesn't need to compete with other content areas. We need to find a way to bring those together and make them complement each other. And so when I shared some of our challenges with Donna, she mentioned Jim and Wendy. And I think I sent them an email, and out of the blue, they set up a meeting right away. And we spent hours talking, and they shared a lot of the things they had been doing on similar projects and were incredibly gracious with their time. And I think specifically one of the things that really helped was social media and the way that they were highlighting and celebrating the teachers they worked with in their projects, and allowing teachers in their projects to share their stories and experiences from their project. And so we began to use a number of the things that they shared with us and a number of the approaches, and we saw a tremendous growth in engagement among our teachers. Almost now we have the opposite problem. We have more interest than we initially anticipated. And I think since that time, we've stayed in touch. I follow them on social media, which is really helpful because now I get to see events and projects and activities they are doing on a pretty consistent basis. We help share each other's content, so that I think that's really helpful. Because we can spread our impact and shares. And then we've been able to collaborate a little bit since then to do other presentations, and it's just nice. I think working on a project like this, it can be pretty intense work at times, and it's just kind of nice to hear and talk with others who are doing similar work.
And we did, and next slide, Donna. We did want to highlight and just some of the amazing growth that David has had too throughout his grant. And we don't want to say like anything towards us, but just highlighting and focusing on social media and that partnership. We always like to say, all of our success is 100% due to our teachers. They run and they fuel, they are our program. So if you will go on to the next slide, I think that's some of David's amazing data. Our evaluator loves data, so we love to highlight the data. And so you can see just the growth, the explosion in not only his post, but his repost, the likes and the views in his program. And then we did want to give you just a couple walkaways, things that you can take with you and start to implement immediately in your own programs. So one of the first things that I will say is in our program, and this is one of the things that we told David as well, is, and I'm going to skip down just a few little bullets, but it's all about a hashtag. And I know that sounds very cliche to say, but we started a couple of years ago. Our first original project was the Charge Grant. So we had to think of a clever hashtag. And so we thought, lead the charge. It's a history grant. There were several, meanings that we could take with that. But our teachers, it became more than just a hashtag. It really became a way of life. So when we wrote for our second grant, it became Recharge, because that hashtag really became the movement for our teachers in Kentucky. So we've kept that same hashtag. And I end every email with that. Our newsletter is focused on that. That hashtag kind of sustains the work that we do here in Kentucky. So I would tell you to be very intentional about your hashtag. Also, create that unified hashtag. So that's the second bullet, but also in your, we have a fantastic, Jamie Saylor does all of our graphics for us, but keep your graphics, try to create a very engaging visuals, but kind of make those consistent as well. So whenever we do push something out from KDC, you can see we keep the coloring the same. We try to do that same. They know that it's from us, from the Recharge Grant, if it's got that same coloring. I will tell you, just like how I started with this, I can push out all kinds of great things. Like, I think our grant is the best. I think everything about it is wonderful. But in that back post that you can see, it is so much more profound and so much more useful if it comes from my teachers, because that's their word of mouth. That's their testimony. So we do, and these are things that, again, that you can walk away with. If your teachers take the time and they share something on social media, please make sure that you respond, you acknowledge, because they're taking that time to push that out there, to say, hey, this is worthy for me to take the time to post it or to repost it or to share. So we always, if you follow us on social media, you will see that we repost almost everything our teachers do, or we will interact at some, in some fashion, because our teachers are taking the time to share what our grant means to them. Again, these are just simple things like set a clear objective. Maybe you don't want to repost, start posting every single day, but maybe your goal is you're going to post, once a week about something in your grant. Definitely, if you don't take anything else from this social media blast, is share the success stories in your grant. Find things that your teachers are doing or your grant program is doing, and someone is going to talk. Let you share the positivity that's going on. So that's the big, wonderful things that we have to share about social media. And Dr. Evans, at any point you jump in there, and David, we can close out.
Just a couple of things, and Wendy and David both alluded to it, but with our grant work and all that we do, it's always been about, and will continue to be about, focusing on the needs of those that we serve. So that's the big picture of what we look at with grant dollars. How can we make improvements for those educators in their schools, their classrooms, their school districts? So that's what it's all about. And again, it's about those that we serve. And we do put a heavy emphasis on, and Wendy talked about this, a big time emphasis on if they're taking time to showcase what they're doing, then we're going to absolutely showcase it ourselves here from KEDC and KEDC grants. But it's also a little bit more about even more than social media. That's one avenue of what we do with our grant work here. But it's also an opportunity for them to showcase what they're learning in our professional learning in our cadres after school or in our cadres on Saturdays. And it's also a way for us to see and monitor the work that's happening in their district. One way of monitoring, but it's again, when they're doing these wonderful things from the work that's ongoing via our grant work, again, they're proud of that, and it gives us an opportunity to showcase that. So one, our awesome leadership with Wendy and both David. It's been an absolute pleasure collaborating with David. And I said this in the summer there when we did a presentation. David talked about his data, and I had to make the exclamation, "The roof is on fire," because he really worked hard at it. And again, it's his leadership that did that. We offered some suggestions and things like that, but we're honored to serve. So that's all I've got there, Wendy and David. And you, I don't know if we got another slide or that may be it, but yeah, contact information. So reach out to us at any time here at KEDC, please. If you've got questions or whatever it may be, we'll share whatever we're doing if we can help others or help, educators in classrooms, district schools, and buildings. That's what it's about. So that's what the work of the grants are all about. Again, back to the needs of those we serve always.
And Donna, at this point, if anyone had any questions about specifically how we do social media or anything, I know David, myself, and Dr. Evans would be glad to.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, David.
No, I wanted to thank Donna for first introducing us, and then Jim and Wendy, and echo everything they said. And I love reading the stories about their teachers, and it inspires me. So, and I would welcome people to reach out to me as well.
Thank you so much. We would love to open it up for questions. We do have one more quick slide related to engagement. And so I'll have Joshua put that slide up. And so in an effort to expand our engagement, we definitely want your feedback so that we can take this momentum and improve it even more. And so we want to offer new opportunities to current grantees, our new grantees, to connect with not only us, but with one another. And so we're asking you to complete this brief survey to just share with us some of the topics and formats that you'd be most interested in, whether it's like trainings or webinars that we deliver for you, or just ideas for formats for engagement amongst yourselves to connect similarly to how KEDC and Ball stay connected. And so if it's very brief, it's only 3 or 4 questions. And so we'd love to hear your feedback for that. And then I'll turn it back over to Orman before we open it up for questions for Jim, Wendy, and David.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Donna. And absolutely, can we just get like a round of virtual applause? Please just use the react icon for Wendy, Jim, and David. They're amazing, and they're such I think amazing representatives of what this program is, what these programs are, I should say, and all of you. I think they do outstanding work, like is done across this entire portfolio. And I just think, I just wanted to take a moment to just really recognize you guys and thank you for, for really classing up the joint, for really, making, really just kind of showcasing the amazing work that you guys are doing as a part of this group and a part of this American History and Civics family. And I just want to kind of piggyback off of, Donna's, remarks about us really being serious and conscious about expanding the grantee engagement. We This is the second year now that we've done this kind of kickoff meeting, and we think it's very successful. But we think that there's more that we can do to really bring together, grantees, whether it's with us sort of at the front, sort of working directly, or if it's sort of like us behind, kind of facilitating and supporting you all as you're kind of engaging with one another. We want to know what works for you. We want to know what types of engagement activities you're interested in. What kind of things do you want to talk about with us and with one another, right? With us present or with us not present, right? There's all kinds of different ways. We have ideas. I think I might have even previewed a couple of ideas for folks at the summit. But also during the summit was where we were kind of hearing from grantees that there was like this hunger and this thirst and passion for additional opportunities to engage. And so it was really incumbent upon us to make sure that you all had opportunities to hear about the work that KEDC was engaging in with Ball State. I had been hearing really great things about that work for a number of months, and wanted to make sure that you guys had a chance to hear a little bit about that. And have also just a sense of awareness in case you want to reach out to them directly to get a sense of how they're doing this work. So please do fill out that brief survey. As Donna mentioned, it's just like 4 questions. If it takes you more than 30 seconds, shame on you. It shouldn't take you that long. It's really, really quick and easy. And so if you have any trouble with it, obviously let us know and we'll get right on that. But it'll help us greatly to kind of figure out what types of things is the cohort really and the portfolio interested in that we can support. So I will get off my soapbox. And I don't know, Donna, do you want to kick off Q&A, or do you want me to do it, or how do you want to do it?
There's already a question in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, perfect. Go ahead.
I think Lydia asked, and David answered a little bit already, but who leads your social media? Do you have a dedicated staff member?
No, I can speak to that. That's us. That's myself, Wendy, Jamie Saylor. It's our grants team. We really invest time and effort into that because again, it's valuable and it's important to showcase what our educators are doing, with the work that grants are, is providing in our district. So again, if someone is taking the time to really invest in that, even if it's 1 or 2 about the work that they're implementing in their classroom, it's absolutely critical for us to follow through and support that and share that out, because also that work cascades to others when they see that social media post. So it's a big deal. So we invest a lot of time after hours, early mornings, and throughout the day, just checking in to see what people have posted. And one thing that we ask them to do is that they tag us, so we get notifications when they do share something on social media, that we get notified, because again, we don't want to miss that. We have hundreds of educators in our work and they all tweet, and we were talking about this yesterday, and it's throughout the day, it's throughout the morning, at night, but it's leading the charge. So it comes back to that, and it's a brand. I'll hush, but Wendy, you can respond to that as well. But
I often get in trouble. I have a daughter that plays volleyball. I have a son that played baseball, and I'm often tweeting when I shouldn't be tweeting, or retweeting at sporting events when I should be watching my children, but they don't realize that that's my job. So I get in trouble often for the amount of time that social media does take. So it just is all encompassing.
Awesome.
I would just echo what they said, and it's most, I mean, 90%, yeah, just me and just extra effort. And it's just something you can kind of pick up and do here and there. But I think you do develop strategies, and I've learned some interesting from Jim and William or Wendy. They will collect information on teachers at some of their PD events, and then they have that kind of ready to go for teacher spotlights, and I'm trying to do some of those similar things to get strategic to make it a little easier to share information about teachers. And if I have a student employee who's helping work a PD event, I'll maybe say, take some photos or write some posts that we can use later on to share information about the event, things like that.
Thanks.
I was just going to add from my perspective, I think the connection, making the connection between grantees is also beneficial because you're already leveraging the networks that each of you has, and you all have like insanely expansive networks. And so like take advantage of that because it's kind of like an automatic, like they were talking about how they reshare each other's content. I think that's extremely powerful. And so that's why we really do want to take advantage and help to facilitate the further collaboration between you all. And this is not the only example of collaboration because I know you all collaborate with each other, like not even just on our grants, but in other programs as well. And so we just really want to leverage that. Any other questions? Feel free to come off mute or put them in the chat. I'm like Ormond, I'm waiting on my wait time. Teacher wait time.
It's hard. It's hard.
It is.
Especially when you're just naturally impatient like I am.
Karen just added something to the chat. As an evaluator, she would like to speak to the importance of social media and being able to see into the classroom as to what the teacher leaders are doing with the knowledge they are gaining from the grant-provided professional learning. It is awesome to have a window into the teacher leaders' classrooms.
And that's one thing that we tell our teachers all the time is that, it is it's real time stamped proof of their learning. So it happens, and that's something that we can't replicate that as far as, you can see active time stamping of, we might have a cadre on a Monday night, but then you see evidence of that implementation the next Tuesday morning at, 9:07. And that's something that for our evaluator or for, evidences that we can say, look at this, it's instant implementation of their learning, which is just, it's incredible.
Yeah, I agree. It's great for evaluators. And I think I feel like one of the interesting things is sometimes I'm even able to share with leaders in the district things they didn't know their teachers are doing. And, I've been able to, I shared one of our really outstanding teachers who's been very involved with our project, does a number of wonderful things, and she was picked up by a national news organization who did a story on her work, and it was great to see her profiled. But then I think all of a sudden now just district leaders found out the great work she's doing. She's a very humble person, so it would have went unnoticed. So I think it's great for evaluation and, great too for districts to be able to promote things that are going on in their district.
And Susan wants to know, what social media do you guys use?
That's a good question. I'll let Jim and Wendy kind of speak a little more in depth. I think I use most of the main platforms like Instagram, Facebook, X. I still, in my head, it's Twitter. A lot of times it's hard to make that transition. But I think I've learned to be a bit strategic there too, where our district and a lot of our teachers are on X. And so that's just, I found to be a good platform for kind of getting across the district. And then for my university as well, our teachers college is a large teachers college. So I will sometimes get some traction and shares from them as well. And that helps get good coverage. And then I try to do things like a blog, like newsletter, but then I can put that onto the various forms of social media. So that's WordPress, but then it goes out across X and Facebook and different mediums.
We're the same. We do the same. And we use Twitter or X as our main, because that's what we found as well as our main social. And I think that we do have those on a slide. If we can, for whatever reason, my chat is not allowing me to. So if I'm not answering, I don't know why I can't. And so we have all of our social. I think that's on one of the slides for both David and our KDC grants as well. We do tag the Department of Education as well in most of our posts. And then we make sure that our teachers always tag, again, we try to look for them to post or tag us as well, because it's really hard if, like I said, we're doing most of that. And I'm sure David is too, as far as the social media ourselves. So if they don't tag us, then there may be one that slips through the cracks and we miss. And so that's one reason why if you have a hashtag that you use, you can search by the hashtag. So that makes it really easy. I can go through and just do a search for Lead the Charge, and then everyone that's used that hashtag, it comes up. So that makes it nice too, to filter and search by that as well.
Dr. Schmidt asked if, he's curious about the actions or supports that you may have seen principals taking after seeing some of these positive stories about civic education practice and civic educators, or perhaps a new orientation in their understanding of civics education.
One really positive thing that we've seen in a lot of our districts is because of our teacher spotlight initiatives, a lot of the schools and districts have started their own teacher spotlight initiatives. Which is, we've loved, as far as our educational cooperative, we've loved seeing that we've kind of spurred that and started that initiative, within our grants, a grant supported initiative. One of the things too, and that was on that last slide that we've given you, like find something that you can do either seasonally. So if civics is a big initiative that maybe within your grant, we always tell our teachers, like, hey, if you're doing something like within your school, like a clean up the neighborhood or clean up the playground, find evidences of that. You can tweet that out and find those holidays. Like, for example, one of the things that we did last year was we had all of our teachers think about, I can't remember the date on the calendar, but there's a date where you can name a new holiday. And so we tried to have all of our teachers within our grants find a new holiday that was civics related. Like, how can you initiate a positive change in your school, in not only in your school, but maybe in your state. And so we did that on that specific date, and then everyone tweeted about it, which was, again, civic mindedness, that taking informed action. And so that's one way that principals, superintendents, they were really getting that recognition from our grants, which was amazing.
And one other thing about administrators, there was a time where we thought about doing a separate strand of professional learning for principals, but I kind of pushed back against that because in my mind, if you're building principal, you really need to be in support of and monitoring what's going on in your classroom via grant work or any instructional practices. So we invite principals to be part of actually professional learning or any cadres that we do. And we do have a number of principals, coaches, district level staff that are part of our grants. Again, going back to supporting the work that's going on in their classroom, it's that piece, but again, it's again showcasing.
I'll jump in and just let Orman actually talk more about the department's social media, but we actually have a lot of like red tape and things that we can't just like reshare, retweet, and post anything that we want to. We don't have the same flexibility or autonomy. We have a whole clearance process for that kind of stuff. I'll let Orman talk more about that, but that's why it's just so important for you all to leverage each other, since we don't have the same flexibility to do that kind of outreach.
Yeah, no, Donna, you hit it on the head. The department's social media is heavily managed. And I recently learned that there are a few program offices that, due to the nature of their work, do have sort of their own, social media presence that sort of lives within the Department of Education umbrella. But it is also heavily managed, right? They just have a little bit more flexibility, they're a little bit more nimble in terms of how they can post things out. So unfortunately, and we do get requests all the time from grantees to, put events or activities or things that are happening within the portfolio on the department's social media, and we will always send those things to the powers that be. But whether or not it actually gets posted is a little bit outside of our control. So, so yeah, that's kind of sort of the environment that we live in. But to Donna's point, really, really important, for you all to make sure that you are, leveraging your networks and showcasing, the work that's happening out there and leveraging social media to do that, because that is obviously the department has a very powerful platform, but you guys can, equally match that power if you're working together to as a community.
I do want to introduce really quickly our CEO, Nancy Hutchinson here. She's been around the table here, kind of been on the side, but without her leadership and support, none of this happens. So she is behind us all the way. Her and Trish, who was also over here on the side, had to step out. They attended the EED summit with us and were part of our work and part of our strategic planning and our brainstorming with our educators we brought. So again, leadership matters, you all, and it's critical. So just want to say that anyway. She didn't know I was going to put her on the spot, but well, I'm going to put her on the spot. So it's kind of what I do. I put lots of people on the spot a lot of times. But anyway, but we appreciate the opportunity to present and share out today. Thank you so much. So
good to see you all again, Ormond. And
yeah, pleasure to see you too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I know we have a few minutes left for